Great to see you all here. Great to be here and be part of the Town History Series. So a few words about myself. I grew up in Waterville and I spent summers at my parents' camp in Georgetown. While I was employed too far from Maine, I spent as much time as I could in the summers here. And now that I'm retired, I'm back for the entire summer, again, every summer. My jobs involved university teaching and administration, and the teaching mainly had to do with ancient Greece, religion, culture, history, that sort of thing. Oh. So it's sort of a vacation for me to read primary sources in English, my native tongue, even when they're handwritten. And I don't mind reading things that are handwritten because I've had a lot of experience deciphering not only students' handwriting in final exams, but also my own handwriting. So without further ado, we have practically no information about the life of William Riggs. We know much more about his death. In fact, were it not for the circumstances of his death, all else being equal, he'd be a name on a gravestone and in the vital records of Georgetown and nothing more. But William Riggs was in the crew of the packet ship Stephen Whitney when it was smashed against rocks on the coast of Ireland in 1847. So we have much more information about how he died than anything else. In fact, I could have called this talk The Wreck of the Stephen Whitney and William Riggs. So let's follow the trail from Georgetown to Ireland and back again. We'll start with his family. The patriarch of the family, Benjamin Riggs, here, was born in Gloucester in 1759. He settled in what was later to be called Riggsville, in Georgetown, and married Ruth Pearl from Edgecombe and went into business provisioning coastal schooners and selling goods of all types to Georgetowners, in addition to, among other things, building schooners and at least one sloop, serving as justice of the peace and as representative at the convention for drafting Maine's constitution when it became a state, and as a member of the Maine state legislature. Now, a satellite view, blurry, of Riggsville, or today Robin Hood, is here at this oval in the sort of northeast corner of Georgetown, well, the northern corner of Georgetown Island, at the mouth of Robin Hood Cove. This is Bath over here, this is Aroussook, and this is a little corner of the Sheepscot River. The cemetery is here, and this is basically the center of the Riggs family operations in the 19th century, the wharf, a store, and family houses along in here. So the cemetery was visible to people here, and from back, you could see it in both, obviously in both directions. If you looked up here, you'd see the cemetery. If you were standing at the cemetery, you could look down and see the houses of the Riggs family. And here's the house of James Riggs, one of Benjamin's sons, who also was involved in the Riggs family business. This is probably where William and his siblings would have grown up. It was a short distance, or it still is, a short distance south of the center of the Riggs operation. So William Riggs grew up in the midst of this thriving family enterprise, seeing coastal schooners that his grandfather, his father, and his uncles were provisioning, seeing them come and go in this cove that led to the big, wide coastal Atlantic world. Now let's take a look at a solid piece of evidence for William's life. His stone in the Riggs family cemetery. I'm approaching the family cemetery here. I'm standing a little ways to the side of Robin Hood Road. This monument that you can see here is the main clue that we're looking at a cemetery. It's Benjamin Riggs's memorial obelisk, standing on a terrace above the rest of all the other stones in the cemetery. You can see some of them down here, towering over everything else. Now we're inside the cemetery and I'm standing behind the obelisk. This is its shadow right here. 65 people are memorialized in this cemetery: Benjamin, his family, other descendants and their spouses and children. And for the most part, they're arranged by nuclear family. So this is William Riggs's family here, his parents, a couple of his sisters, and that's the top of his stone there. And here's a close-up of the stone. This is not his grave. It's a cenotaph, a word from ancient Greek that means empty tomb. Empty because his body was, as far as we know, not recovered after the shipwreck that he was in. So I'll read it. William W. Riggs, lost on the coast of Ireland, November 10th, 1847, age 30. Ship Stephen Whitney with 91 others. Now, we've looked briefly at Riggsville, where he came from, where he's remembered, and let's begin a trip to understand what the inscription on this cenotaph means. The young man named in this Seaman's Protection Certificate, which was issued in Philadelphia or in Baltimore. It was issued in Philadelphia. I'm getting ahead of myself. On May 17th, 1836, must be our William Riggs because he's a native of Bath in the state of Maine. He's the right age, 19, and he has the same profession as our William Riggs. He was 5'8", dark complected, has dark brown hair and gray eyes, a small scar near the right corner of his mouth, a native of Bath in the state of Maine. So we know it's him. Affidavits like this one were issued to American sailors from 1796 to the end of the 19th century. Originally, they were used to protect American sailors from being impressed by the British. When they were first instituted, you could buy one at any customs house for 25 cents and proof of citizenship. So how did you prove you were a citizen? You said, I'm a citizen. You swore you were a citizen and you had someone else as witness. He was perhaps here as part of the crew of a coastal schooner, and we could speculate for a long time about how he made his way here. But not only did his grandfather build sailing vessels, but his father also built a schooner, which was named the William in 1822 when our William was 5 years old. So perhaps he made the trip here, at least partly on a rigged schooner. Although he had this sailor's affidavit in 1836 that was issued far away from home, William is apparently still listed on the 1840 census in Georgetown, where the household of James Riggs includes James the father, who is listed here. This census has does not give the names of the individuals in the household. It's just the householder, 99% of the time a man. Here's Thomas Lennon, one of the neighbors of the Riggses. Here's Benjamin Riggs and Moses Riggs, who was another of Benjamin's son. And then by age group, here are all the males, and in another column, in several other columns over here, the females. But at this point, today they're not going to matter. They did matter, but not in this talk. So we have James, 55 years old, and his sons, probably a 10 or 11-year-old here, Benjamin, someone who is 18, John, and James and William, who were both between 20 and 30. So we can imagine that he's still listed in his parents' household. So James didn't think of him as having established a separate household elsewhere yet. The ship named on William Stone, the Stephen Whitney, was a New York to Liverpool packet ship. New York was definitely not the end of the world for people from his part of Maine, so it's not strange that William would have found himself here. A glance at a few lists of ship arrivals in New York newspapers shows home ports of Bath, Harpswell, Woolwich, and Wiscasset. So not at all surprising that he would have ended up in New York instead of in Boston, say. Let's look at New York and its maritime economy in William's time. This engraving, which was made 30 years after William's death, sets the scene for us for looking at New York to Liverpool shipping and the New York City waterfront. After the War of 1812, the US and Great Britain signed a trade agreement in 1815, and shipping between Great Britain and New York and the rest of the large ports on the East Coast increased. Ships that sailed overseas had customarily left New York when they had a sufficient amount of cargo to make the trip worthwhile financially, and passengers took their chances on accommodations on ships that were mainly cargo vessels. But with the opening up of trade, irregular departure times made for really frustrated merchants who needed to get goods to their customers and to communicate in a reasonably regular and timely manner with their agents abroad. So a group of entrepreneurs came up with the idea of scheduling regular departures of ships to deliver goods, people, letters, newspapers, etc., between New York City and Liverpool, which was sort of like New York's sister city at the time. It was roughly the same size. It was a prominent port on the west coast of England. It had just overtaken Bristol as the port. The result was the first overseas packet ship line called the Black Ball Line, which began operations in 1818, and it included four ships, one of which months. This was a great thing for the New York waterfront economy. Now, manufacturers and exporters could work backward from the date of departure to calculate a regular timetable for production and delivery of goods, and thus they avoided running up large storage costs or ending up with deteriorating cargo. A regular sailing schedule also kept passengers from waiting around idly, twiddling their thumbs in New York or Liverpool for days until the ship captain decided it was time to set sail. Plus, packet ships were built in part for passengers, so they provided good and even luxurious accommodations, as we're about to see. Thus began the relatively short-lived golden era of sailing packet ships that left port regularly, no matter how much or how little cargo they had stowed in their hulls, or whether passengers occupied all the cabins or not, between New York City and ports like Liverpool, London, and Le Havre. The Black Ball Line soon had competition from three other lines. And in 1834, Robert Kermit founded the Kermit Line, which sailed between New York and Liverpool with regular departures once a month, not on the same day as the other lines. They were nicely spread out. Up to now, I haven't found any image of the Stephen Whitney. Up to now, I haven't stopped looking. But this is a ship of a similar size and a similar date, the Roscius, of the New York to Liverpool dramatic line. It's a different packet line. It looks somewhat like, I imagine, because of its dimensions, the Stephen Whitney. So if you want to imagine you're looking at the Stephen Whitney, just squint your eyes a little bit and you can pretend that's the Stephen Whitney. So we now come to the ill-fated packet ship, the Stephen Whitney, which made its first voyage in 1840. It was named for an investor in Robert Kermit's line and one of the wealthiest men in New York. His first business venture involved selling groceries, particularly wine and brandy, which apparently came under the category of groceries in the day, wine and brandy wholesale, and he went on to be involved in railroad construction projects, and he had a position as a director of the Bank of America. Just to show you how wealthy he was, this is his mausoleum. That door is a little bit, you don't have to duck to get under that door. And I'm showing it to you in part just to point out how elaborate and striking his tomb was, and partly to remind you of that obelisk that the Riggs family put up in 1846 for Benjamin Riggs. He was a wealthy man on Georgetown Island. And comparing those two, I want to point out that these two men didn't live in the same social, political, and economic world at all. So they were similarly wealthy and powerful in their own environments. This is the first newspaper ad in the New York newspapers for the Stephen Whitney. It was the largest ship in the Kermit line at the time, about 25% larger in terms of tonnage. It was 869 tons, apparently, although there are many numbers for its tonnage, but I'm picking 869. Then the next largest ship in the line. This newspaper account says it was 1,000 tons. I think that's probably a little bit of newspaper hype, or maybe they're using a different measurement scale for a tonnage. This new ship received a lot of praise in the New York Daily Herald. This is the sort of ad, by the way, that all shipping lines, ferries, coastal steamers when steamers were operating that were published in New York newspapers. And they all have these little ships here, sort of like icons. And when it's a steamer, there's a little steamship here. Every exertion will be made to promote the comfort of passengers and the interest of importers. The price of passage to Liverpool in the cabin, as in the other lines, is fixed at $140 with wines and stores of every description. The cabins are arranged on a new plan and present an unusual degree of comfort and accommodation. And down here we have the address of Robert Kermit, who is running the line, and his offices were at 74 South Street. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to read all of this because you have other things to do today. But this article, which was published in the New York Daily Herald on January 3rd, 1840, also mentions that in point of strength, beauty, arrangement, and model outstrips the other three ships in the line. Her figurehead is a bust of Stephen Whitney, Esquire, the wealthy merchant. She is perhaps the strongest vessel ever built, double-kneed and double-bolted throughout. The berths, their position, the woodwork of the cabins, and in fact, everything is entirely different from any other cabins extant. It cost $100,000 to build, and it was 160 feet long on deck. It was built with what we might call redundancy, as you've just seen, double kneed and double bolted throughout, which was to make it supposedly especially resistant to damage. As for interior decoration and amenities, it had mahogany paneling, a dining table that sat 50 people, sofas that are large and splendid, and, quote, a beautiful stained glass representation of Neptune and a host of sea gods going full tilt over the water in their chariots. Also, wine vaults and tanks holding 4,000 gallons of fresh water. So when this ship was destroyed, it was even more shocking because of its seaworthiness. It was the strongest ship ever built, as well as its luxury. The crew, of course, and also the deaths of people. The crew did not spend their time, however, lolling about on large, splendid sofas, drinking wine and guzzling fresh water. More than a dozen packet ship lines operated between New York and Liverpool in the 1840s, and their ships needed to get to their destination as fast as possible so that the owners could beat the competition, become well known for speed, acquire more customers, and keep making money.
Right.
Thank you. Sailing ships with auxiliary steam engines and ships powered only by steam crossed the Atlantic, but in the 1840s, they weren't really a serious threat to sailing ships yet. These sailing ships, of course, depended not only on wind power, but also on manpower. So captains took risks in bad weather. They really didn't like reducing sail in bad weather, and they pushed their crews as hard as they could. But the crews were kind of proud of being tough guys on these packet ships. They called themselves packet rats, and they were proud of enduring harsh mates, bad weather, and hard work. The East River waterfront in New York in the 1840s and 50s was bristling with wharves and therefore with ships. These notations here are go with these wharves here. So there's a wharf for the Black Star Line. There's one for the Kermit Line, which I think is here, and various other coastal and transatlantic lines here on the East River. This over here is the Hudson, which we're not concerned with today. Brooklyn here and East River across here. There were shipyards off to the beyond this snippet from the map up to the farther up the river. Liverpool's docks. Oh, and by the way, this is where Robert Kermit's office was. So he's right across South Street from the wharf that his ships would have docked at. Liverpool's docks were on the shallow tidal river Mersey. This is a bird's eye view of Liverpool in 1847. Liverpool's docks were on the shallow tidal river, the Mersey here, and consequently the Liverpool entrepreneurs and businessmen had built wet docks, which had gates that opened when tide was high. Ships could sail through or be towed through these gates. They closed the gates when the tide was going down, and the ships would stay floating and be at the level of these wharves around here, so they wouldn't end up resting on the muddy floor of the river. Nevertheless, equally crowded as in New York, possibly more crowded. I can't believe that there were this many ships in here. The bird that was conveying the information to H.E.S. Young was probably exaggerating a little bit. So this is the 19th century, 1849 image of New York from Brooklyn Heights here. You can see there were already steamers that were going up and down the Hudson or the East River, up and down the coast of the Middle Atlantic states. And if you look over here, you can see a forest of masts on the East River. I'm about to show you a picture of the building that's here, and the Kermit Line ships were probably docked somewhere in here. So the building that I was about to show you is this one. This is the Skirmerhorn Row block. It's on Fulton Street. The Fulton Street Fish Market was formerly off to the other side. It's in Queens now. This building was built in 1811 or 1812. It housed offices on the ground floor and some shops supplying equipment and provisions to ships. And this was several floors of warehouse rooms. There was a system of cranes and pulleys to bring things up to the upper floors. It's been improved a little bit since 1811 to 12, but it's basically what a large warehouse and office building would have looked like in the 19th century. And right now, it's owned by the South Street Seaport Museum. Next, another example of what the New York waterfront looked like. This is where we were just a minute ago. Now we're going to stand here and look south. A view of South Street from Maiden Lane, New York City. In port, life was brutal and dangerous. Not like this cheerful scene where people are bustling back and forth and there's a nice lady and a child with a white dress on and he's got a little sailor hat on. Life was brutal and dangerous. A far cry from Rigsville and Georgetown Island, where swearing, selling ardent spirits, and going to dancing school was frowned upon. If it was frowned upon, people were doing it, right? At least it was frowned upon by the Baptists of Georgetown, who were the Riggs' neighbors. In both ports, taverns, brothels, and seedy boarding houses flourished in the waterfront neighborhood. New York newspapers of the time published accounts of robberies, scams, knife fights, and the occasional murder on the equivalent of a police blotter column. So that was the world that we can presume William Riggs was living in when he wasn't on a ship. So on October 18th, 1847, William Riggs walked up the gangplank onto the Stephen Whitney, and the ship left the New York waterfront behind. From about October 22nd to October 27th, it sailed in company up the east shore of New England, out past Nova Scotia to go around across the Atlantic and come down past Ireland, the southern coast of Ireland. So for those 5 days, it sailed in company with the packet ship C. They parted after 5 days, and the C went on to Liverpool. It got there a few days before anybody knew what had happened to the Stephen Whitney. After 24 days, the Stephen Whitney was by itself off the southernmost coast of Ireland, near the Irish Sea, on November 10th. Likely, the captain, C.W. Popham, was hoping, perhaps more confidently or desperately than he should have been, that they would reach Liverpool as soon as possible. New York Harbor was very roughly 3,000 miles behind them, and the mouth of the River Mersey was about 400 miles ahead on the English side of the Irish Sea. That would be far off the fastest times of 15 days. They'd already gone 24 days, but a few days longer would be far off the fastest times of 14 or 15 days, but it wouldn't be shockingly slow. Nevertheless, he didn't want to be even close to shockingly slow because, as I said before, they wanted to make good time and make more clients, customers, and make more money. The ship carried cheese, clocks, thousands of bales of cotton, and 110 people, including the crew and the captain. A reliable count gives 34 people in the crew, including a cook, a doctor, and stewardesses, 6 people in first-class cabins, 7 in second-class cabins. So there's some extra chairs around that dining table that seated 50 people, and 63 people in steerage. If the ship were going in the other direction, it would have obviously carried more people in steerage than on this eastbound ship. A ship in a different packet line, but about the same size as the Stephen Whitney, brought 300 steerage passengers and 19 cabin passengers from Liverpool to New York in July 1847, right around the same time that the Stephen Whitney was sailing east. Remember, 1847 was the worst year of the Irish potato famine. We have a mix of information about the Stephen Whitney's horrific shipwreck and the scene of William Riggs's death. 2 reporters who described the scene a day or 2 later, a deposition made by the first mate who survived, unlike the captain, another crew member's eyewitness account, and a statement by Robert Kermit, the owner of the line. I won't read quotations from all of these, but we do have a variety of information that can tell us about the wreck from different points of view. This is a map view of where 3 lighthouses were on the southern coast of Ireland. These were the main navigational aids on this coast of Ireland at the time. The light on Cape Clear, the blue one here, was covered in fog. And as the ship came around the coast here, the captain and the first mate consulted. The weather was not good. They consulted and they decided that the light that they saw was the light at Old Head of Kinsale here. In fact, they were over here. 10 or 15 minutes after they passed what they thought was the light of Old Head at Kinsale, and they were perhaps going to go into Cork Harbor here. 10 or 15 minutes after they passed what they thought was the light at Kinsale, the ship struck broadside on rocks, virtually without warning. Remember the Riggs Cemetery. How did the Riggs family know what to inscribe on William's stone? From a newspaper or a couple of newspapers. The news traveled from the village that was closest to the wreck to Cork, the largest town nearby up here. And from there, the news went to Liverpool. And from there on the ship Britannia that arrived in Boston with British newspapers on the evening of December 8th. Remember, it happened on November 10th. The story was, of course, reported in detail in New York papers, which regularly published the departure dates for ships. And poignantly, sometimes tears came to my eyes while I was reading the newspaper accounts of this. And this is an example of one of those times. Because nobody knew what was happening with the Stephen Whitney. They kept reporting when its next departure time would be in New York newspapers like this one in the Evening Post up until December 10th, even though long since the Stephen Whitney did not exist any longer. So its next departure time was going to be February 11th from New York, and it was going to leave Liverpool on March 26th. Other US papers published summaries of the wreck, but the quotations I'm about to read come from the Northern Tribune in Bath, Maine. Since the first report in the Northern Tribune has the headline, Arrival of the Britannia, it's possible that the news came directly from Boston. You remember the Britannia was the ship that brought the news first, rather than all the way from New York. The first report appeared in the Northern Tribune on December 10th. This very brief account here, just these few lines here. Parliament assembled on the 18th of November, by the way. The ship Stephen Whitney of New York was wrecked on the night of November 10th off Cape Clear on West Calf Island. Out of 110 persons on board, 92 perished. And then the only detail we have, other than where this happened, is among the list of the crew who perished is the name of William Riggs of Bath. This is the account that was published in the Northern Tribune the next day. It's much longer than this little snippet that I have here. I will read from it, but I'm not going to show you. You would just see a massive type if I put it on the slide here. So, particulars of the wreck of the Stephen Whitney. The subject, although a mournful one, and one calculated to cause lamentation and weeping in many of the families of our American friends, will be perused with great avidity. We have therefore collected from the several accounts of the disaster which have reached us the following details. I am sure that the subject, although a mournful one, and one calculated to cause lamentation and weeping in many of the families of our American friends, must have been a reference to people that the editor probably knew. Oh, I've gone too far. This is from the first mate's report. The weather was particularly thick and the wind blowing very hard. The ship was under double reef topsails. At 6:00 p.m., the wind increasing, the sails were close reefed. At 8:00 p.m., made the land very close to the ship. After clearing off from the land, saw a fixed white light, which, after consulting with the captain, I took for the old head of Kinsale. At 9:45, the land was made ahead, the ship was put a port, and on coming round, owing to the heavy sea then running, the ship went ashore. He goes on to describe what happened, but we're now going to switch to a reporter's description based on probably interviews with the survivors. And picking up from where the mate left off, orders were promptly given to bring her round, but the tremendous surf, which beat upon the rocks, issued a sterner command, and it was evident that the ill-fated ship was doomed. A brief moment only ensued, and one terrific crash followed, which instantly consigned members to eternity. This single encounter stove in the entire side of the vessel, and in less than half an hour, there was not two planks together, not a single article of any description that could afford the means of escape for either passenger or sailor. You remember the thousands of cotton bales. People who survived the plunge into the sea and were able to stay clear of the rocks clung to floating bales, which of course rapidly became weighed down with water and sank underneath them. 18 survivors scrambled up the rocks and eventually found shelter in two miserable apartments amidst a potato famine in Ireland. The poverty-stricken, starving families who lived there sheltered them as best they could, and the men learned they were actually 4 miles inside the bay, just west of Cape Clear. This was headline news in Ireland, where it hit home for its Irish readers. The Stephen Whitney wasn't just a high-quality ship with fancy stained glass windows showing Neptune and chariots going over the sea. It was also part of the means by which people left Ireland for America. Liverpool was an important embarkation point for immigrants. The disaster soon made the London papers, whence the Britannia's information that made it to Bath, and it appeared not only in numerous British newspapers for the next few weeks, but also papers in the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, and Austria, which published brief accounts. So we have an account in French here, an account in German, and a report in Dutch. I'll read the Dutch one in English. I could do it in Dutch with an American accent, but you probably don't want to hear that. The packet ship Stephen Whitney, which had left New York on October 18th, was completely destroyed on the 10th of this month on the coast of Ireland. Of the 110 persons on board, 91, they were off by one person. 91 are dead, 76 passengers, including 20 women and 2 children, and 14 men from the crew, in addition to the captain. The other 2 accounts have pretty much the same thing. This one says it was wrecked on West Calf, and this one talks about the other packet ship, the Sea, which accompanied the Stephen Whitney for a few days when it was closer to the east coast of the U.S. As an indication of the speed at which overseas news traveled, which, as you know, at the time was as fast but no faster than a ship could sail, the story finally appeared in Australian newspapers in early April 1848. This was the second major shipwreck of a packet ship. This is not the Stephen Whitney. The first wreck was that of the Albion of the Black Ball Line in 1822, also on the south coast of Ireland. It took on water in its hold in heavy seas, and it slowly drifted out of control towards these rocks where it broke up. You can see people and cargo here, and there's a few people who made it up onto the rocks. Because of these two disasters, the Irish authorities realized that this part of the coast needed better navigational aids. So a much higher, more visible offshore lighthouse was built in 1853 on Fastnet Rock, about 4 miles out to sea from Cape Clear, where the Stephen Whitney was wrecked. This is the current lighthouse with a light that's 177 feet above sea level, and the light is visible for supposedly 27 nautical miles. That's practically the same numbers as for Seguin. So you can imagine Seguin, but much smaller and just a rock like this. We've now seen the shipwreck and the circumstances of William Riggs's death, and we found ourselves far from Georgetown. So let's return to the Riggs Cemetery for a minute to look at the inscription on William's tomb again. Few gravestones in small 19th century towns mention the manner of the death of the person buried under the stone, although in Georgetown, some of them include, for fishermen, the start, lost at sea. William Riggs's stone is, as far as I know, unique in Georgetown in the amount of information that it provides, much more than just lost at sea, which points to a sort of anonymous family tragedy. The details here, which you recognize from newspaper accounts, transform this man from Riggsville into part of a disaster that affected many, many people. As if today, someone's gravestone mentioned the airline, the flight, the date, and the number of casualties in a major plane crash. It became, therefore, part of a history that connected him to a much wider world than Riggsville and Georgetown. But still, in this cemetery, we can imagine later members of the family seeing the stone and asking maybe their parents, their uncles or aunts, to tell them what happened. And even someone today who happens to be wandering through the Riggs family cemetery can see the stone, wonder, what does it refer to? Do some research in old newspapers and tell you the story. But there's a postscript. Speaking of later members of the Riggs family, James Riggs's 1860 will includes a hint about William's life in Liverpool. You might have been thinking, maybe that was the first time that William Riggs stepped aboard the Stephen Whitney. Maybe he was just going up and down the US coast until then, and then made the wrong choice, not knowing what lay ahead of him, and got on the Stephen Whitney. Well, we know he was in Liverpool before this trip that was incomplete. And this is how we know. So this is a close-up of James Riggs's last will and testament. And it's a part of the will. And I'll read you the part that's got this red line next to it. And I also give to William W. Riggs, born in Liverpool, England, and formerly living with me, but now at sea, purporting to be my grandson and son of my son, William Riggs, deceased, $100 to be paid to my executors in 1 year after my decease. $100 is the same amount of money that he gave to each of his two granddaughters, each of his two unmarried granddaughters. James Riggs was well off, and $100 was just a small part of his estate, but it's interesting that he treated both this younger William Riggs, who was purported to be his grandson, and his granddaughters, whom he knew perfectly well were not purported. They were actually his granddaughters. He treated all three of those descendants equally. James Riggs took young William into his household, but purporting is a really strange thing to see here. Did he not have good proof that the boy was his grandson? Probably he didn't. Was he trying to avoid future court battles over young William's right as a descendant to part of the estate? We have no idea. As for formerly living with me, the 1850 census for Bath lists James and Jane Riggs, three of their children, age 19 to 25, Benjamin 21, Sarah 19, Mary 25, and a son-in-law, Guy Goss, you might recognize that name, and William W. Riggs, an 8-year-old born in England. By the time of the 1860 census, William Riggs is 17 and he's a mariner. And the rest of James Riggs's family are listed here. Guy Goss is now a shipmaster on his way to becoming a wealthy and powerful shipbuilder in Bath. If we consider the comment born in England, we have to ask, how did he get to Bath, or at least to the United States? We could speculate wildly, and you know what I'm about to do. Or we could decide that the trail has, for the moment, gone cold. For the former, we have the tantalizing immigration list of the ship Marie, Homeport Bath, Captain A.N. Littlefield, which arrived in Boston on August 22nd, 1849, with 284 laborers, servants, and children from England and Ireland. And down here, enlarged here, is a 6-year-old William Riggs. There's no Riggs on either side of him here. This is Mr. and Mrs. Henshaw and Patrick Hanrahan. No obvious relation to him. We don't know. So we're left with questions. Is James Riggs' purported grandson really this emigrant to Boston and Maine in 1849? What made James Riggs take him into his household? And what happened to William Riggs, mariner, whom we last saw on the 1860 census at age 17? At the moment, I have to stop speculating. You can wait for the historical novel later. At the moment, it would be the responsible thing to say that his trail has gone, his trail has gone cold. Although I have hope that someday someone will appear at the door of the Georgetown Historical Society asking about their great-great-great-grandfather, William Riggs of Riggsville. Thank you. I'll entertain questions, and when I don't know the answer, I'm going to call on somebody else. So
Where was Stephen Whitney's ship built and where?
it was built.
It?
It was built by the Berg, B-E-R-G-H company, farther up the East River from where its wharf was. There was a lot of shipbuilding going on in New York at the time. Anybody else?
For further research, I think it was one of Moses Riggs' children or one of the other Riggses, male Riggses, who has a son named Kermit.
Yes.
So it would be interesting. I never
thought about
Kermit
that.
line, and I thought, So there's another connection,
Yeah.
perhaps,
That's
with New
interesting.
York.
Wow.
Would you like to share some of your speculations?
Some of mine.
Speculations
No.
about how,
I just speculated.
no, about
This
how,
whole talk has been speculation.
no, it's awesome, awesome talk.
No,
About 8-year-old.
I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
How did you decide to do this topic?
How did I decide on it? One day I was walking in the Riggs family cemetery
Yeah.
and I saw a bunch of the usual cemetery gravestones. And I saw this one and I said, what is that? And the rest is his talk.
Did you go home and Google it or stand there in the cemetery with your phone and look up the Stephen Whitney? How do
I didn't stand there. No, there were mosquitoes. I think I probably took a picture of it. I don't remember. It was a while ago. And then I thought, Stephen Whitney, I wonder what this is. And I started looking and I went to the New York Public Library. When I'm not up here, I'm in New York City. And I read things about packet ships and shipping, and I found the name of the ship. And then I started reading these newspapers, which are amazing. I could have given a talk about journalism in the 1840s and how shipwrecks are reported, but that's for another time. Anything else, James?
So I'm trying to do my math here. So when was William purported born? Would it have been like
18, well, if that was him in 1849 on that ship, and he was 6, then he would have been born in 1843 or 2, depending on when his birthday was.
4 or 5 years before?
So he would have been 3 or 4 before father died, if that's his father. So here's my thought about the purported. could it be that William wrote home from New York or from Liverpool and said, hello, family, guess what? I have a son. His name is William, named after me. He's wonderful. I love him dearly. Weather is fine. Maybe he did that. And then somehow, but how did this boy end up here across coming? I'd really like to speculate and think that the captain knew the Riggses and somehow took him under his wing. This is still being recorded. This is real speculation. But somehow someone like the captain or the captain's wife or something took him under his wing. I don't know. That's the first chapter of my novel. So I'm just giving away the secret.
Do we know more about the survivors and
Yes.
who they were?
We know their names. We know the names of some of the survivors. We know the names of some of the people who died, and some of the people who died were important people in New York, and we have notices of their death notices from the next few days after the original report saying, we're grieved to say that on the 10th of November, Mr. So-and-so, an important person in New York, was drowned in the shipwreck of the Stephen Whitney. And we also have names of some of the survivors. The steerage passenger names, as far as I can tell, I can't find a passenger list, a full passenger list yet. But we don't know. We know the names of the steerage passengers who didn't survive, a few, but not many.
Was there any recordings of any salvaging of that ship?
Oh, yes. There is recordings, but not of any salvaging. The ship, so I read an account that said there was not a single plank left connected to another plank after the shipwreck. And somebody else said it looked like the ship had been ground through a mill. The only thing that was left were like chips floating on the surface of the water. And the cotton, some of the cotton washed on shore, but it was spoiled because it was soaking wet with seawater, and the rest of it sank. And the ship, the clocks, the cheese and all that sank. So there was nothing left. A British ship sailed through the area the next day, or maybe 2 days later, when they knew what had happened. And there was nothing to salvage. And the first mate reported that too. In his report, he said he was careful to say there was nothing left to salvage, which I expect he did because his report was going back to New York eventually, and he wanted Robert Kermit to know that, they hadn't left anything to be looted by anybody in Ireland. The Irish weren't thought of well at this time, as you know.
Is there any information about the survivors and how they actually survived?
Well, the 18 people who survived, they were all men. One was a 12-year-old boy, I think, 12 or 13. The rocks were like, according to reports, they were 50 or 60 feet high. And in the dark, these 18 people climbed up the rocks and then, hit grass at the top and felt around and found a cairn that was indicated to them, a pile of stones, that there were people here. And then they found these huts. And we know their names. One could probably find out what happened to them if you just started looking up their names, but I didn't do that.
Thank you.
And could be problematic. If they were named John Smith, you wouldn't be able to tell, but if they had some really unusual name, you might be able to find them.
I'm just thinking that possibly in the second edition of your book, after the first book is written and published, that there's also another sub-story perhaps about this being a part of the infamous slave trade triangle where
Yes.
cotton
Yes.
is leaving New York and going to
I know.
Liverpool.
I didn't want to talk about
Liverpool, what,
Yes, they were bringing cotton, which was coming from the South, and slaves up to New York and shipping it to Liverpool where it could be made into cloth. Anyone else?
So, if there's a Williams Riggs the cemetery at Riggsville and there's a Williams Riggs stone, are there any indication that the other survivors, not survivors, the other ones that perished have stones somewhere in New York or the family?
I'm sure that the wealthy ones whose
That's what
death notices were reported in the paper have nice cenotaphs somewhere. As I said, I didn't look for all of the people who died. But I don't see why they wouldn't have. It would be interesting to compare the stones and see
Yeah,
if they all
yeah.
had the same.
Did you try to find a trail for the child's mother?
Yes, I did. I have to go to Liverpool to really do it, seriously. Jean's gonna come with me, okay? So, yeah, I looked for, birth records in Liverpool. I found, the names of the offices, the government offices in Liverpool where I could go and their addresses, but I couldn't get into the records themselves.
The fact that he had Riggs as a last name, would that indicate that he might have been married, or was that custom to?
She could have named him Riggs without her name being Riggs, right? I mean, there are a lot of people, I did look for people named Riggs in Liverpool, just people in general, not necessarily for the mother. There are a lot of people named Riggs in that, well, enough people named Riggs who were born at various different times that I can't be sure whether they're all in the same family or not. It's not an uncommon name. It's not an uncommon name in the US either when you start looking around. Anything else? Okay,
Were there any other local men on that ship?
no, that was interesting. He's the only person from Maine. There was somebody from Denmark. There was someone, I think there was someone from Connecticut, New York. They were from various different parts of the US, plus this man from.
And did you see a current view of Stephen Whitney's mausoleum, what condition it's in now?
It's in fine condition now.
Oh, wow, that's great.
The Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn doesn't let things go to pieces. I don't know who pays for the upkeep. It's a tourist attraction of sorts. People who like to visit cemeteries really like to visit that cemetery because that's not the only fancy one.
Just wondering about Captain Popham. Is
Yeah.
he related in any way to the Popham?
No, he doesn't seem to be. Some reports say that he's American. There was one kind of racist, if that's the right word, bigoted, ethnocentric comment in a New York paper that sort of said, of course he's not an Irishman. I don't remember the exact words, but an Irish newspaper said he was from the Cork area. So, and his wife lived in Brooklyn when this happened. So maybe he was born in Ireland and came here. I don't know, but he might be related to these Pophams distantly, but not close enough.
Have you connected with the Riggs family in Georgetown about some of what they might have?
I have read the book by, I'm looking at Jean, Riggs.
Winthrop?
Yeah, Winthrop Riggs, but I didn't talk to any other Riggses. Okay, thank you.